Imagine a battlefield. On one side, the absolute cream of French chivalry. An army of nobles decked out in shining, custom-fitted armor, so sure of their victory that they were already gambling for the prisoners they'd capture. They saw themselves as the rightful heirs to a centuries-old warrior tradition, a living tide of steel whose wealth and breeding made them invincible. On the other side, a starved, exhausted, and outnumbered band of Englishmen, riddled with dysentery. Many of them weren't knights, but common farmers and tradesmen. They were trapped hundreds of miles from home, with their backs against the wall. Their armor was battered, their banners were few, and their prospects looked utterly grim. But they had a secret: a 6-foot piece of yew wood, a weapon that, in the hands of a commoner, was about to make a knight's expensive armor terrifyingly obsolete. This is the story of how that simple weapon didn't just win a battle, it shattered an entire class of warrior and changed warfare forever. To get why the English were so desperate on that cold October morning in 1415, we need to rewind. The whole mess was part of the 100 Years' War, a generational grudge match over who was the rightful king of France. England's King Henry Fifter's, young, ambitious, and certain God was on his side, revived his family's claim to the French throne. In August 1415, after pawning some of the crown jewels to pay for it all, he sailed for France. His first objective was the port city of Harfleur. Henry figured it would be a quick win, a show of force to get the French to talk. But Harfleur didn't roll over. The siege dragged on for a brutal month. And the English army, stuck outside the city walls, was being destroyed not by French swords, but by dysentery. They called it the Bloody Flux, and it tore through the camp, killing hundreds and leaving thousands too weak to even stand. By the time the city finally fell, Henry's army was a ghost of what it had been. He'd landed with about 12,000 men. Now maybe a third were dead or too sick to go on. The fighting season was almost over, and his advisors begged him to just sail home from Harfleur, take the win, and come back next year. But Henry was a man of bone-deep pride. Retreating felt like a loss. So he made a risky, almost reckless choice. He would march his remaining army, somewhere between 6,000 and 9,000 men, overland to the English-held port of Calais. It was meant to be a defiant ride through enemy territory, a symbolic power move. It quickly became a desperate race for survival. The French, meanwhile, had been busy. They'd gathered a massive army, and now they shadowed the English, blocking their path. Henry's tired, sick men were forced on a long detour, just trying to find a place to cross the River Somme. And every day, the French army got bigger, as nobles from all over the kingdom flocked to join, hungry for the glory of capturing a king. On October 24th, near a village called Agincourt, the French finally cornered them. The English looked up and saw a force that utterly dwarfed them. Modern estimates put the French army at around 12,000 to 15,000 men. The English, by contrast, had 9,000 at the absolute most, and about 80% of them were common archers, not knights. The French were led by the Constable of France, Charles d'Albret, and the veteran Marshal Boucicaut, along with a who's who of powerful dukes. They were so confident that they spent the night feasting, reportedly playing dice for the English nobles they planned to capture. They figured the next day would be a cakewalk. For the English, the mood was bleak. King Henry ordered total silence, a grim contrast to the party in the French camp. They were trapped. In front of them, a sea of French steel. Behind them, nothing but enemy land. There was no retreat, no escape. The next morning, on St. Crispin's Day, they would either pull off a miracle or be wiped from the earth. Faced with impossible odds, the English had an ace up their sleeve, one the French nobility fatally underestimated. It wasn't some complex new machine, it was a piece of wood, the English longbow. Now, to call it just a piece of wood is a massive understatement. This was a weapon that had already changed English society and was about to change European history. The longbow itself was a 6-foot staff of yew, a masterpiece of natural engineering. It used the dense heartwood for power and the flexible sapwood for spring, creating a devastatingly effective weapon. But what made the longbow truly revolutionary wasn't just the bow, but the system that produced the archers. For over a century, English law had required every able-bodied man to own and practice with a longbow. Sunday afternoons weren't for games, they were for state-mandated target practice. This created a nationwide pool of expert archers that no other country could match. These weren't just guys handed a weapon before a battle. Many were yeomen, free men, small landowners, and tradesmen who took immense pride in their skill. Becoming a master longbowman was a lifelong journey. Training started in childhood. Years of practice physically changed their bodies. Skeletons of longbowmen show overdeveloped arms and shoulders, a testament to the incredible strength needed to use these weapons. The draw weight of a warbow was immense, typically between 100 and 140 pounds. Some may have even reached an incredible 180 pounds. A modern Olympic bow, for comparison, is around 50 pounds. This power translated to terrifying performance. A single archer could shoot 10 to 12 arrows a minute, far faster than any crossbow. A volley from thousands of archers was described as a storm that could blot out the sun. But what about the armor? How does a wooden arrow beat a man wrapped in steel? It's complicated. A direct hit on high-quality plate armor from 200 yards might not punch through. But battles aren't lab tests. First, not all armor was top tier. Plate was wildly expensive, and many French soldiers had lower quality pieces or gaps in their coverage. Second, the archers used different tools for different jobs. For long-range chaos, they'd use a broadhead arrow to maim horses. But against armored men, they used the bodkin point, a long, narrow steel spike designed to punch through mail, or more importantly, find the gaps, the armpit, the visor slit, the joints. Even an arrow that didn't penetrate could disable a man, with the sheer force of impact breaking bones or knocking him off his feet. And at Agincourt, if you fell, you weren't getting back up. Plus, the first targets weren't the knights, but their horses. A wounded horse would panic, throwing its rider and crashing into the men behind it, turning a disciplined charge into a chaotic, screaming pileup. These English archers were versatile professionals. Dropping their bows, they could grab swords, axes, and mallets and become a fearsome infantry force. The French saw a rabble of peasants. Henry V saw his key to solving an impossible problem. As dawn broke on October 25th, the two armies stared each other down across a freshly plowed field, hemmed in on both sides by dense woods. A week of heavy rain had turned the ground into a muddy, clinging nightmare. This terrain was no small detail. It would decide everything. The narrow field, only about 750 yards wide, meant the French couldn't use their huge numbers to surround the English. They'd have to come straight at them. Henry arranged his army perfectly. He put his dismounted knights in the center, but the heart of his force, his thousands of longbowmen, he placed on the flanks. And crucially, he had them hammer 6-foot sharpened stakes into the ground in front of them, a deadly makeshift fence aimed right at the enemy. For 3 hours, nothing happened. The French were content to wait. They were blocking the road to Calais, so all they had to do was stand there and let the starving English army waste away. But Henry knew his men couldn't wait. In a move of incredible audacity, he ordered his army to advance. The whole line moved forward, carrying their stakes, until they were just at the edge of extreme longbow range, about 250 yards. They hammered the stakes back into the ground. It was a direct taunt. It worked. The French nobility, enraged by the nerve of these commoners, lost all discipline. Forgetting their orders and ignoring the mud, the first line of mounted knights charged forward. Sir Thomas Erpingham, commander of the archers, tossed his baton in the air and yelled, "Now strike!" What happened next wasn't a battle. It was an execution from 250 yards. Thousands of bows drew as one, and a storm of arrows rose into the sky, plunging down on the charge. The sound was said to be like a terrifying hailstorm. The result was catastrophic. Arrows tore into the less armored horses, which screamed, bucked, and fell, crushing their riders. Others, maddened with pain, bolted back into their own infantry, causing chaos. The great French cavalry charge dissolved into a bloody, tangled wreck before it even reached the English line. Then came the main French force, thousands of knights on foot. Weighed down by 60 pounds of armor, they trudged through the mud, which was now churned up with blood and bodies. Every step was exhausting. They sank to their ankles, sometimes their knees. All the while, the arrow storm never stopped. The English archers poured volley after volley into the slow, densely packed French ranks. The French were jammed so tightly together they could barely even lift their arms. If a man was hit and fell, he was often trampled to death by the men behind him or simply drowned in the mud, unable to get up. When the first wave of French knights finally reached the English line, they were completely spent. They crashed into the fresher English men-at-arms who stood on firmer ground. This is when the English archers made their move. With their arrows running low, they dropped their bows, grabbed their swords, hatchets, and mallets, and charged in from the flanks. Unburdened by heavy armor, they were fast and agile in the mud, swarming the exhausted French knights, pulling them down and killing them with daggers through their visors. The slaughter was unbelievable. The French second line pushed forward only to pile up on the dead and dying from the first, creating a horrifying rampart of bodies. Then, at the height of the fight, Henry got word that his camp in the rear was being raided. Fearing a second attack and worried that the thousands of French prisoners they'd taken might rearm, he made a ruthless choice: execute the prisoners. His own knights refused, seeing it as a dishonorable act. So a squire and a group of archers were given the grim task. It was a brutal violation of the code of chivalry, but Henry saw it as a grim necessity. In that moment, the romantic idea of noble warfare died in the mud. The battle probably lasted less than 3 hours. When it was over, the scale of the French disaster was clear. The field was a slaughterhouse. The numbers tell the story. English losses were incredibly light, perhaps 400 to 600 men. French losses were catastrophic. Somewhere between 6,000 and 10,000 Frenchmen were dead, with over 1,000 nobles taken prisoner. But it wasn't just the number. It was who had died. 3 dukes, at least 6 counts, 90 barons, and thousands of knights. The Constable of France himself was dead. An entire generation of the French ruling class had been wiped out in a single afternoon. The exhausted English marched to Calais and returned home as heroes. The victory at Agincourt fueled a wave of English pride, immortalized in songs and, of course, Shakespeare's Henry the Fafnir. It seemed to legitimize Henry's claim to the French throne. For France, it was a crippling national humiliation. The loss of so many leaders created a power vacuum that allowed Henry to conquer huge parts of northern France. In 1420, he even forced the French king to sign a treaty naming him as the heir to the French throne. It looked like Henry had won it all. But the real legacy of Agincourt was bigger than politics. It was the death knell for an entire way of war. For centuries, the battlefield belonged to the armored knight on horseback. War was a sport for aristocrats. Agincourt proved, brutally, that a disciplined army of commoners with the right technology and tactics could utterly destroy a superior force of elite knights. The peasant with his yew bow was deadlier than the noble with his lance. The battle marked the rise of infantry and ranged weapons, a trend that would only continue with pikes and gunpowder. It was a step towards the democratization of the battlefield, where skill mattered more than birth. The age of the knight didn't end overnight, but Agincourt was the moment the foundation cracked. The shining armor of the French knights wasn't a symbol of invincibility. It was just a heavy, mud-clogged coffin. The story of Agincourt is an incredible reminder that history isn't always shaped by the people in charge, but by innovation and adaptation from the ground up. If you enjoyed this dive into the mud and chaos of medieval history, make sure you hit that like button and subscribe for more stories that break down how our world was really made. Let us know in the comments what other legendary battles you want us to cover. In the end, the Battle of Agincourt was more than a famous English victory. It was a brutal turning point. It was a collision of two worlds, one of chivalry and aristocratic privilege, and a new one of disciplined tactics, revolutionary technology, and the power of the common soldier. The French came expecting a glorious tournament. They found themselves in a muddy killing field, systematically taken apart by an army they'd written off as a joke. The reasons for the English victory were clear: the power of the longbow, Henry's brilliant use of the terrain, the fatal arrogance of the French commanders, and above all, the skill of the English yeoman archer. At Agincourt, the age of chivalry was drowned in mud and shot full of arrows. A new, deadlier era of warfare had begun.